How's everybody doing today? I feel like we've lost half of our ranks. Wasn't there isn't this almost full on, yeah. You can't really lose people when all you've done is introduce the syllabus. It's like, so we are going to start on our lectures today. We're talking this morning out of chapter 1. I am recording the lectures on something called TechSmith Relay, and then I'm able to capture it and post the URL onto Moodle so that if you want to go back and re-listen to anything or see calculations, you can. I used to have the capacity to also do calculations on a smartboard and capture that, but those didn't make the transition over here. Did I tell you all this already? Sorry. Anyways, we have this little document reader. I did use it with a fair amount of success yesterday in tax class, so I'll be trying to do that as well. You don't have any calculations really in chapter 1, so it's sort of a moot point. But I will try as much as possible capture what we do in class so that you can follow up later. So, does anybody have any questions for me or concerns? Or is anybody new that wasn't here on Friday? Hi, what's your name? Alex. Did you get registered on Moodle and you can see the syllabus and see all the materials? Okay, that's all we did on Friday is we went through the syllabus. How many of you got registered for the CLGL? Okay, great. So what that is, it's in the syllabus. It's going to be a long online project that we do. And there's a link on Moodle, and there's an access code in the front of your book. Okay, well, let's see. Really sorry about my voice. I don't know about you guys, but my voice is just like hashed from the smoke. It's horrible. I sound like a old lady. All right, chapter 1. What we're going to be talking about in chapter 1, I think this is a pretty uninspiring title, but really what we're going to be talking about is the laws that require us to do what we're doing in here. Why are we required to keep all these records? What are we complying with? And really it's also sort of a walk down the historical lane because it talks sort of a little bit about workers' rights in flagging the history of America. So we're going to start by having a conversation about the payroll profession. It's a very actually growing profession. It's a key part of an accounting department, but because there's so many laws to comply with, a lot of people think this class is just like plugging out numbers. It's not. There's a ton of compliance, a ton of interpretation, and a lot of legal ramifications to what you do. Employment law is a pretty vast area, and litigation is really expensive in an area where you see a lot of litigation, right, about employment rights. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. Payroll profession, bound by a code of ethics, pretty good salaries, well-respected field. Okay, so I'm just going to put up, and we're going to go through each of these in some depth. This would be on one piece of paper, the framework of what drives payroll law. So the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in the 30s, and that is the law that mandates minimum wage and overtime. And it provided us with our framework for child labor laws. So there was quite a lot of very meaty basis that came out of the Fair Labor Standards Act. This is just a broad brush. We're going to talk in pretty great depth about all of these laws. FICA, does anybody know what FICA is the fancy name for? Right, but we call it, most people will refer to it as Social Security. Yeah. So there's two pieces to FICA, and again, we'll dig into this with more depth, but one of them is Social Security. The whole Social Security program came into being under FICA. And the second piece of it is Medicare. So this is a pretty big, broad umbrella. Anybody have any idea who was president when Social Security and Medicare were passed? It was Roosevelt. It was FDR. Okay. So, and many people will say that the ACA under President Obama, the Affordable Care Act, that there has not been a piece of social engineering legislation as big as ACA since FICA. And prior to FICA, there was no government pension, there was no government health care, there was no, safety net for workers. So very, very significant profound piece of legislation. We also have income tax withholding laws, both on the federal and state level in Montana. We have a few localities in Montana, like in Whitefish, you have to pay, I think, like a tourism tax of 0.8%. And so some localities will have taxes. We don't have any in Missoula. And I think like 6 or 7 states don't have income tax. We do in Montana, as you know. Unemployment tax acts, we're going to look into those as well. Federal and state unemployment tax acts, those were also from the 30s. And prior to that, if you became unemployed, that sucked for you. There was nowhere to go to get any benefits or compensation. Okay. Fair employment laws, Civil Rights Act, EEO, Americans with Disability Act, lots of our laws that have come from the 60s forward, as spurned by the Civil Rights Act in 1964, that have provided non-discrimination clauses, the ability for folks with disabilities to have access to reasonable employment and be accommodated. So that's been really about the last 50 years. There's also some states that have minimum wage that's different from federal. Our minimum wage here in Montana is 80 cents an hour higher than federal minimum wage. In any state where you have a differential between state and federal law, the employers are required to pay the higher of the two. So kind of digging into these a little bit further, Fair Labor Standards Act 1938, again, who was president? FDR, set the first minimum wage. Our minimum wage at the federal level now stands at $7.25 an hour. There were some rudimentary in the FLSA, some rudimentary equal work for equal pay provisions, but those weren't really fleshed out for another 30 years. And there's still a significant differential between gender equity for pay. Anybody have any idea what women make as a percentage of men on the average in this country across all professions? Have you heard this number? It's about 81%. We make on the average, women make about on the average 81% of what men make, and that gender inequity, that differential doesn't seem to be moving very quickly. I mean, about 10 years ago, I think it was 78%. So it's not moving very quickly. So FLSA applies to companies that are involved in interstate commerce. That means that you move something across state lines, or if you produce something that's used in interstate commerce, like I'm a box manufacturer and I sell to Flathead cherry distributors, and they use those boxes to pack my cherries that go across state lines, then I have to comply with the FLSA. And also, for the first time under FLSA, you were required to maintain payroll records. So if an employee comes back to you and says, hey, I feel like I had overtime coming, or you didn't compensate me for all the hours that I worked, I as an employer can't say, oh, sorry, I forgot to archive those records or whatever. required by the FLSA to maintain payroll records. Oy, oy. Okay, FICA, comprised of 2 taxes. And what's interesting about FICA is that it's the only taxes that are paid by both the employee and the employer. So the way that it works, and let's see, I just want to light up here. No. I don't know that I can do that. Tell me if you can see this pen. I'm still learning how to work with the rooms. Can you see that in the back? Yeah? Okay, great. So the law called FICA actually has 2 distinct components to it. One is OASDI, and we call that Social Security. I mean, we meaning lay people. In here, we'll refer to it by its appropriate name, which is OASDI. And it stands for Old Age, I think that's the OA, and Survivors Disability Insurance. So, yeah, Old Age, Survivors, and Disability Insurance, OASDI. So Social Security has 3 components to it, right? Pension component, which is old age. Survivor's primary earner dies and still has a minor at home, get compensation, and long-term and permanent disability. Okay, so those are the 3 distinct components of Social Security. That tax, anybody know how much you pay of your paycheck in the OASDI? Roughly? Okay, 6.2%. And the employer pays that too. So you've got 6.2 from the employee, 6.2 from the employer, obviously the total. 12.4%, so it's significant. The thing, and we'll talk in more detail about this, but the thing to kind of keep in the back of your head is that there's a cap for OASDI. In other words, if I make $2.5 million a year as a pediatric oncologist, I'm not going to pay 6.2% of my whole $2.5 million salary. It's capped, and that cap changes every year. And I'll show you when we go through the tax table at the end of class, and I'll show you what the cap is. The other part of FICA is HR, and we call that Medicare. I mean, lay people call that Medicare, okay, which is the government's health insurance, essentially. That tax is also taken out of our paychecks and matched by our employers, but it doesn't have a cap. So if I make that $2.5 million as a pediatric oncologist, they're going to take the entire paycheck is going to be susceptible to 1.45%. So also significant, right? Plus, if you're high income, which means you make $200,000 or more, if you're single, or you make $250,000 a year or more, and you're married. So together, so this is combined income. For Medicare, only the employee pays an additional 0.9% on everything over the amounts I just wrote up there. So just to recap, there's a lot going on here. OASDI, flat 6.2 plus 6.2 up to the cap. Medicare, 1.45 plus 1.45, no cap. I'm CEO of Johnson & Johnson. I make $200 million with my stock options. I pay 1.45% on the whole thing. And if I'm single, everything I make over 200 grand, I pay an additional 0.9 on. So that pops me up to 2.35% on everything over my 200K, right? But the employer does not match the 0.9. So in that case, 2.35% for me on everything over 200 grand, 1.45 for the employer for everything. So again, significant. This whole new tack-on came about as partial funding mechanism for the Affordable Care Act. Okay, obviously controversial. Questions? Go ahead.
So if you own it, you the employer like yourself, you can pay that?
Great question. So if you're self-employed, you're both, aren't you? You're both. So if you're self-employed, 12.4 plus 2.9, assuming you're making less than these amounts. Of everything you earn before you ever touch income tax. Significant. I have a tax practice on the side, and I would say probably 60 or 70% of my clients are self-employed. And a lot of them are classic Montana folks that are just kind of cobbling together a living, right? So they don't make a lot of taxable income for income tax purposes. So I do a little mechanic work, I trade a few cars, I slap up some drywall. I make 12 grand a year. I don't make enough to pay income tax, but you know what I gotta pay? 15.3 of that 12 grand. Okay, that's about 1,800 bucks. If you're living on 12 grand a year, what's the odds that you have an 1,800 bucks in your checking account? Right? So that's always like a come to Jesus moment for small self-employed folks. What I try and get them to do is to set up a separate bank account, and when they get checks for turning a car or slapping up some drywall, to get them to put 15% of that into an account so they've got the money. But again, when you're living on 12,000 bucks, that's not so easy to do. That's a really good question, and this is a point of contention in our tax law. But this, you guys, is what's funding healthcare for our most marginalized people, retirement for our older folks, disability insurance for people that are disabled in a long-term basis, right? And the projections here are not great as far as solvency. What do I mean by that? What's solvency? Yeah. That's, the odds of these programs meeting needs in the long term are pretty slim anyways. In 1945, there was, I'm not going to get these numbers completely right, but there was something like 12 workers for every one person collecting Social Security. And now that number's like around 4. So just mathematically, you can look at those numbers. There's all sorts of projections. It's going to be broke by 1930. It's going to be permanent. 2030. It's going to be broke by 2037. There's lots of different projections. I don't think, I was going to say Congress in all its wisdom, would really actually let that happen. But the longer it goes without a permanent solution, the more likely it is for some, for a big blow up. With Medicare, of course, we have increasing medical costs. We can't see collectively as a society get our medical costs in just in congruence with what the rest of the Western world spends. We spend 17 times more than Finland per person to take care of us, and by every measurement, we're less healthy. So, I mean, it's kind of whack. We've got a lot of big issues to solve around this. Okay, income taxes, I don't need to tell you about that. It's different in each state. It's levied on how much you make. Anybody have any idea how many brackets we have in this country, federal income tax brackets? I think there's 7. The lowest one is 10%, right? So if you're single and you've got taxable income of less than, exact number, around 12 grand a year, you pay 10%, and then it goes up to 15, 25, 28, 33, 35, and the highest is 39.6. Those are marginal tax brackets, which means it's the next dollar of income is taxed at that rate. So all of us, whether we make $11,000 a year or $11 million a year, the first, 12 grand is taxed at 10%. Right? And the next, I think 40 grand is taxed at 15%. So everybody climbs at that same stepping stone, that same stepping ladder, and then getting paid more and more for each subsequent dollar of income. Marginal tax rates. So people will say things like, which is just misinformed. I don't want to take that raise because it's going to throw me in a higher tax bracket, meaning like I'm going to have to pay this new tax rate on all my income. No, you're not. It's the same stepping ladder of increments for everybody. So if that raise puts you into the new higher bracket, that new higher bracket is only for that additional income, and you're still going to be better off. Okay, FUTA and SUTA. FUTA is the Federal Unemployment Tax Act, which basically was also under FDR and said what FUTA says is that every state has to set up its own unemployment plan. And that's what SUTA is. So really, FUTA just mandates that SUTA exists. FUTA is a tax, it's a really small tax, it's 0.6%. that you pay to the IRS, and what they do with that 0.6% on the first 7,000, so it's also capped, $42 per person per year. What they do with that is make sure that the states do their jobs of having a SUTA in place that works. SUTA is where you go to get your unemployment benefits. Okay? We have Montana SUTA, Delaware has Delaware SUTA, Hawaii has Hawaii SUTA, right? And it's different as far as caps and rates and benefits for every state. That's all I've got to say about that. We'll talk in much more detail about that as we get on down the road. Fair employment, 1964. Who signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964? JFK drafted it. Who signed it? He would die by the time. Who replaced JFK? LBJ. Johnson. Is that what you said? Yeah. Sorry. You kind of whispered it, like, not with a great deal of certainty. Yeah, LBJ signed it. Kennedy was the one that got it drafted, got it off the ground. LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, obviously extremely contentious, 53 years ago. Basically, the whole Southern delegation walked out of the convention, and that was basically when the South went from blue to red, was under the Civil Rights Act. Blue Dog Democrats, pretty much that was the beginning of the end. And it basically said that you cannot discriminate on 4 things: on who you hire, who you fire, who you promote, and who you compensate, or how you compensate, based on 5 things: race, religion, color, national origin, or gender. Extremely controversial. Now, there's a lot of things that are conspicuously missing from the 5 categories. Okay? Sexual preference isn't in there, age isn't in there, disability isn't in there. Those things came last or later. This was the base or the framework with which all that other legislation subsequently was passed. So, Civil Rights Act of 1991 was a follow-up, what is that, 27 years later, which basically said if discrimination is intentional, then you can go after compensatory and punitive damages. So if I sued the University of Montana and said they are intentionally discriminating on paying me less than a male colleague, and I can prove that it was an intentional gender discrimination, I can go after them not only for back compensation on that wage differential, but punitive damages. What does that mean? Sorry?
Pain and suffering, stuff like that.
Yeah, pain and suffering, punitive. I'm going to punish them for willfully violating the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I'm going to ask for pain and suffering or punitive damages of another $3 million to go with my back wages of $35,000. So this is big law. Okay, so right on the heels of the Civil Rights Act was the ADEA, because age was not included in the original Civil Rights Act. ADEA says that you can't, basically same thing, can't discriminate in hiring, firing, promoting, or compensating me based upon my age. There are, however, some caveats to that. You've got to have 20 or more employees to have to comply with the ADEA. So if I'm a small little mom and pop shop and I've got 3 employees, I don't have to comply with ADEA. And there's some key exceptions, like it's safety related, like airline pilots have to retire at 62, smoke jumpers have to retire at 57. Age does play a factor in the safety protocol. Okay. ADA was passed in 91. Anybody remember who was, not remember, you guys probably remember, you were born, but who was president in 91? Reagan left, I think, in 88, and Bill Clinton was in his 2nd or 3rd year. This was very, very interesting law. I had just gotten out of grad school when ADA was passed, and there was vivid graphic footage, video footage of disabled folks out of their wheelchairs laying in streets in front of buildings that they couldn't get into. Okay? I mean, it was very disturbing footage. But their point was, I can't get in this library to get a book. I can't find a restroom in this building. I can't get a job in this facility because I can't get into it. I mean, 25 years ago, we didn't have to have a way for disabled folks to get up to a 4th floor classroom, or have a restroom they could get their wheelchair in, right? It's not okay. So ADA was a really big movement, and with footage as, as graphic, as some of the things we saw in the civil rights movement. Now, what does it say? Again, caveats. It only applies to companies with 15 or more employees. And you can't, what it basically says is you can't discriminate against a qualified person in an employment situation because of their disability. Well, who's a qualified person? A qualified person is somebody that can perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation it's very vague, and it's resulted in a lot of cases being litigated under the ADA. Okay. What's reasonable accommodation? I apply for the job that I've got now and I'm blind. Should the University of Montana reasonably accommodate me? I'm the most qualified applicant. I've been in the field, I've taught for years and years, I've got vast application experience, I'm a researcher, I'm proven to be effective in the classroom, I'm recently blinded by a car accident. Should they reasonably accommodate me? Okay. What if I just applied to a very small accounting firm as 3 employees? Should they reasonably accommodate me? See the problems already? It's resource-based, okay? I had an experience, this was passed, like I said, what did I tell you, 91? Yeah, it's passed in 91. Huh?
Bush was president in 91.
Okay, well then that's not right. Then it was later. It was passed under Clinton. Right, because 88 to 92 was Bush Senior.
Yeah.
And Clinton came in 92 to 96, 96 to 2000. Yeah. And then, yeah. Okay, so what it was closer to 93, 94, somewhere in there. I remember it very vividly for the images, but also I was controller at a pharmaceutical company in northern Colorado, and we had just such a situation occur. We had a wet lab where we had microbiologists and chemists were doing their research. It was a research lab. And the stations were all, when you stand up, whatever it is, 36 inches or 42 inches or whatever. Standard, standing level was all the workstations were at. And we had a gal applying in a wheelchair. And she was extremely qualified. She was a kick-ass microbiologist from Boulder. But she needed ramps to get to the stations, to get up to the stations. But then, quote-unquote, able-bodied person would be standing way over. So it was really a dilemma. We were a really small company, 22 employees, I think, 21 employees. Was it reasonable to accommodate? Do you see what the issues are? We ended up getting movable ramps, but they were costly. So there's a lot of issues here. This one doesn't have an acronym because it's such a long title. Federal Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. This was Clinton's probably linchpin piece of legislation. Most of us call it, or lay people call it, welfare reform. Something this country had been asking for a long time. And basically what it did, another very complex piece of legislation, but as an overview of what it did was it ended generational welfare as we know it. In other words, in order to continue to receive federal funds, there were a series of things that recipients now were mandated to do. And I'm not going to go into it. It's like something like a 1,700-page piece of legislation. How does it affect payroll? It affects payroll because it required OCHE, which is the Office of Child, OCSE, Office of Child Support Enforcement, for the first time ever to set up a system whereby if a parent left a state and quit paying child support, you could fine them if they, filled out a W-4 and went to work for another employer over state lines and garnish wages and bring it back to the home state. So what I'm saying is, for the first time ever, as part of this piece of legislation, there was really comprehensive studies on poverty causation. And obviously one of the things that bubbled at the top from that is, single parent families have a higher propensity of being in poverty. Well, what happens there happens in, the situation being that the one parent leaves and doesn't pay the child support, they go to the state lines and they're never found. This now says, so when somebody comes to work for me and I'm processing payroll, I've got 30 days to get their social security number, their address, and their name to my state child support enforcement agency. And then it all goes into a mainframe in Washington, D.C., and it's cross-checked. So if my ex-spouse goes to Florida and gets a job, it's still, his wages are still going to get garnished in some tax funds. So this has been one of those like really vast pieces of legislation that you can't imagine actually works, and it has. It's reduced defunct child support payments by something like 70%. I mean, it's highly effective. FERCA. So I also remember this really graphically. I had just gotten out of undergrad. I don't remember ever even hearing the words immigration growing up, 60s and 70s, going to college in the 80s, kind of a non-issue. Certainly in the Midwest, it was a non-issue. 1986 under Reagan, we have our first major immigration bill passed. There really hasn't been anything even close to the magnitude or significance. What's that been, 30 years, 31 years, right? Obviously, it's a very hot button issue right now. There really hasn't been major subsequent immigration legislation. This was first off, it formed the Immigration and Naturalization Services (INS). Right, so the federal funding for this bureau. It bars hiring folks that are not legally documented to work in this country. I refuse to use the words illegal aliens because you can't be illegal as a human being in my mind. You can be documented or undocumented, but not illegal. So how did we accomplish this? What was the tool to accomplish this? And the I-9, most of you have probably lived your whole lives with them. When you go on your first day of work, you fill out a W-4, you fill out an I-9, right? You got to show it, one, if it's strong, like a passport, or two, forms of ID if they're less strong. And then your employer holds on to that employment eligibility verification worksheet in case the IMS ever comes and asks to see proof that everybody there is valid to work. Criminal penalties, civil penalties, new system down here, this bottom bullet called E-Verify. If you're, again, it sort of depends upon what industry you're in, but say, I'm just pulling an example out, but there's, a really big issue in the Midwest, in Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, in the meat packing plants, right, with potentially undocumented folks working in these facilities. And so if I'm an employer, I want to go on and verify that you guys, who I all just hired for my third shift, are in fact authorized to work in the country. I can go on and cross-match the I-9 information that you've provided me with the Social Security Administration. That's really critical because there's a pretty robust trade in this country with false IDs. So if y'all come to me and you have IDs that I'm using to complete the I-9s, I want to go cross-check them and make sure it's not like a dead person's identity or identity. Because the penalties for an employer are very, very severe if they haven't done their due diligence. Okay, the homework for chapter 1 for, what's the date?
It's on the syllabus, right?
The homework is on the syllabus, and it's due on Friday for chapter 1.
Okay. I think I
FMLA, 1993. Clinton, another Clinton A lot of people don't have very good things to say about it, but he made some significant legislative changes in this country.
Although 88 wasn't in 1990.
Huh?
88 was in 1990.
90, ADA was. Stand corrected, thank you. So Family Medical Leave Act, first let me just tell you, before FMLA, if you have like a sick kid or a parent that had, Alzheimer's, or whatever your situation was, a spouse that had debilitating cancer, and you came to your boss and said like, I need time to take care of my kid, my husband, my parents, myself. It's like, sorry, you're fired. And that was perfectly acceptable. Not from a moral standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, right? Okay. FMLA changed all that. Now, when you push a major piece of legislation like this through, it's got lots of compromises. The way FMLA was first proposed, was 12 weeks of paid leave for all these things: birth, adoption, critical care, for a child, foster parent. 12 weeks of paid leave. Okay, how well do you think that went over with the small business lobby? Not well. Do other countries have that? Yeah, like where? So all of Scandinavia, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, not sure about Iceland, but I would guess. 1 year paid. You have a baby, you got a year off. Paid, because socially, they understand that you're going to be more productive and have less needs down the road, collectively as a family unit. Okay? This was a big fight in our country to even get this passed. So you get 12 weeks of unpaid leave. Now, some states are individually trying to sort of push the envelope and get paid leave. But from a federal standpoint, it's unpaid. And it only covers companies with 50 or more employees. So again, in Missoula, Montana, right? I mean, that probably eradicates, I'm just making this number up, but 3/4 of our business is easily, probably more than that. And how many businesses in Missoula, aside from like university and hospitals and, Roseburg and the airport, have 50 or more employees? So you don't have to comply if you have less than 50 employees. This is also an interesting act, though, from an employer standpoint, because if I've got somebody that has chronic health needs, and the 12 weeks doesn't have to be, subsequent to each other. It can be a day a week. So I've got somebody that's not showing up a day a week on the job, then I've got some issues with an employer. But this is how it stands now. Like I said, some states are trying to approach it state by state. And some employers, you guys, are very liberal with these policies on their own dime. I mean, my older son works in San Francisco, and he's part of the whole high-tech world out there. And I mean, all those big campuses, from Facebook to Amazon to Google to Tesla to, they all offer extremely liberal policies around things like this. But that's off their own dime. FMLA also says you have to continue healthcare coverage. So if I'm taking my 12 weeks unpaid leave to be with my infant that I just had, I've got to have my healthcare coverage continued during that 3 months, and then I have a right to come back to the same or like-kind job. If you've got somebody on active duty, that expands up to 26 weeks, and some states have paid family leave. It's right up there, 94. Uniform Services Employment and Reemployment Act. Basically, this is saying, hey, you've got a right to come back to the same type of job you had before you were deployed, with your seniority still in place, right? You can't be lower on the totem pole than when you left. The only exception is if you were dishonorably discharged. Okay, last big concept, and then we'll call it a day. Well, I want to show you the tax tables really quick too. So ERISA, this was extremely important. 1974. Gosh, that kind of touched me a little bit. So Johnson didn't rerun in 68. Nixon won. Nixon won again in 72. I don't think he had resigned. I think Nixon was still president in 74. Anybody else remember that one? I think Ford. Nixon was still in 74. Ford came in like 75, served a year, and wasn't reelected. Okay, so what does this say? 1974, Nixon's president. This is just, let me just paint the historical picture where this came from. It was the first rumblings of international competition for our big industries, like steel and cars and appliances and consumer goods. Prior to that, there really wasn't a global trade. I mean, it wasn't like everything had made in China stamped on it when I was a little girl. Everything was made in America. Our blenders, our hammers, our vacuum cleaners, our cars, I mean, nothing was made anywhere else. Everything was made here. Okay, clean idea. Ford. In 94 or 74? So he already
He started in September 2nd.
Oh, okay, thank you. So companies were, I mean, Bethlehem Steel and Plymouth and, you know, TWA Airlines. There was a lot of big companies that were starting to become less solid. And what did they do when they needed cash? They raided their pension plans. So you guys have worked for me your whole lives, 1974, you're all in your 50s. And back then, everybody had a pension, right? A pension, though Social Security, you're fine, right? And the odds were you worked for one or two companies your whole life. Do you know how many companies they say we all work for now? Or not me, but your generation? Is it third? I don't know. Oh, I think it's like 7 or 8. Oh, is it? 10. Yeah. In other words, a lot. You don't sit at one job most of your life. Okay? So if your pension plan is rated and you're really up a creek and nobody saved for their own retirement, then that just wasn't what was happening then historically. So big pension plans were coming up empty because the CEOs had basically, or COOs had rated them for operational cash. So what this says is now you've got to have a trustee who monitors your pension plan. So when the University of Montana takes money out of my paycheck and matches it, they don't have it sitting in their general fund. They have to send it to a third party who they can't get in to get that money. Okay? They can't touch that money because it's really my money, isn't it? Waiting for me to retire. So you have to have a trustee that monitors your pension plan. Secondly, you have to be vested. You have to start vesting in 3 years, and you have to be fully vested in 6. Does anyone know what vesting means? So it's not so much that they, well, yeah, if they match, you have to be able to take the money with you. That's what vesting means. If they don't have to match. So a company can set up a 401k and say we're not matching. You can totally do that. But if you match, you've got the money's got to come with you. Some portion of it has to start coming with you in 3 years, and all of it has to come with you within 6. We'll talk about this a little bit more. Okay, last minute. I don't have time to go over it, but I just want to show you where it is, and I'd like you to start taking a look at it. I think, did I ask you to take a look at it for today? Okay. Let's see. All right. Well, I'm not going to go all the way onto Moodle then, but in Moodle, I think it's right under the syllabus maybe. It says Tax Tables 2017. Okay. And there's 2 columns, employee taxes and employer taxes. I did talk about this already. Okay. By this Friday, you should feel comfortable replicating that whole
matrix. Right? So if I came in and said,
That's kind of,
what do the tax tables look like? You would feel pretty good being able to just spit it out. The homework for chapter 1 and 2, it's in the syllabus. There's not much in chapter 1, some review questions and some discussion questions. Okay. Don't copy the words out of the book, write them in your own words. Anybody can copy, I need to know that you'll understand what you're writing. Okay, we'll go through that, I'll finish up 1 and start on 2. Have a great rest of your week.